All right. Let's get to the comments. Let me see. Do I have? All right. Right. Music or something. Hello. All right. These comments on. Be beginning soon. We'll be beginning soon. Hope everybody's having a good one. Popping up once again. Working on staying live. Trying to do a little something each day. All right. For those on IG, welcome. Today we're going to be having a little, we'll call it a sober history lesson. All right. Let me adjust my camera. We're talking about a glorious time in American history. All right. I know it's Friday, so might not be too many people coming in here, which is fine by me. Actually, this is just a story that I believe is one that needs to be recorded and out there. Put it out there in the ethos, or in the ether, I should say. All right. We'll be getting started in a minute. Hope everybody's having a good day. Hope everything is well. All right. For those that are just tuning in, I will be reading from this book here. All right. It's the Encyclopedia of Slave Resistance and Rebellion. The Encyclopedia of Slave Resistance and Rebellion. All right. This is a book. It's actually a 2-set volume encyclopedia. This is what, A through N. I also have O through Z. And it basically profiles, the many different forms of resistance and rebellion that resulted in my people surviving and overcoming enslavement in America. All right. I'm going to be doing more of these profiles because I feel that this is information that needs to get out there. And for all of my sober soldiers out there are things that we can learn from this incident, this resistance, the Christiana Resistance, which is something you probably did not hear about in school. There are many other struggles that we learn about in school, but this book has opened my eyes to many of the ones that we have not. You see how many pages is in there, and this is 2 volumes. All right, so what I'm going to be reading from this book is the passage on the Christiana Resistance of 1851. This happened in Pennsylvania, all right, in 1851, when the Second Fugitive Slave Act was enacted, and basically slaveholders, I shun from the word slave master because there's only one master, and that's God, all right. So the slaveholders from the South were coming into the North and in other areas looking for escaped enslaved Africans, because the Fugitive Slave Act basically dictated that they could do so, and that the law enforcement officials, remember, the Fugitive Slave Act was a federal act, which means regardless of free or slave state, this was something that was enacted. And so with that Fugitive Slave Act, essentially, it was basically saying that, hey, if you've got some slaves that escaped, you got free reign to go out there and get them and take them back. We don't care if they're in the North, the South, where they're at. If they escaped from the South to the North, where it was technically illegal to hold slaves, you can come back and get your property, right? And we're going to this resistance chronicles the story of 4 four enslaved Africans that escaped, found some refuge with some other escapees, and resisted an attempt from a slaveholder to come and kidnap them and take them back into bondage. So I'm going to go ahead and read the story, and then I'll give my slight commentary on it. So this is the Christiana Resistance of 1851, as written in the text Encyclopedia of Slave Resistance and Rebellion. All right, here we go. On September 11th, 1851, Maryland slaveholder Edward Gorsuch disembarked from a train near the town of Christiana, just north of the Mason-Dixon line in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. With him were his son, Dixon, U.S. Marshal Henry S. Klein, and 5 other armed white men. They had come under the auspices of the new Fugitive Slave Act, and they meant to capture and re-enslave 4 people who had escaped from bondage and had taken shelter among the free African community of Christiana. The fugitives had found shelter in the home of William and Eliza Parker, themselves escapees from slavery. The Parkers were leaders among the local black community and had contacts with the Underground Railroad and the black-led Vigilance Committee of Philadelphia. William Parker had used force repeatedly over a 10-year period to resist slave hunters and rescue their captors in Lancaster and neighboring counties. In Christiana, he had organized several of his black neighbors and prepared them to assemble quickly for armed resistance should slave catchers appear. A sentry was on watch as Gorsuch and his party approached the Parkers' farm. Thus, the Parker household was alert and armed as Marshal Klein came to the door and attempted to serve federal warrants for the arrest of the fugitives. Klein and Gorsuch entered the house, but retreated when confronted by William Parker. Parker and Klein exchanged shots, but no one was injured in the opening phase of the confrontation. Klein attempted to talk the resistors into surrender by appealing to his authority as a federal marshal, but Parker shouted his defiance of the Fugitive Slave Act. As the 2 men argued, Eliza Parker blew a loud blast on a horn, signaling friends and neighbors. In a few minutes, a crowd of African Americans armed with firearms, swords, and farm tools stood outside the Parker house. 2 white neighbors, Castor Annaway and Elijah Lewis, also appeared. They did not join the resistance, but neither would they help the slave catchers execute their warrants. They urged the slave catchers to retreat before blood was spilled. Most of the Gorsuch party lost heart at this point and began to withdraw. Edward Gorsuch, however, remained adamant and stood alone before the house, demanding the return of his property. Parker responded wryly that Gorsuch might inspect the furniture and farm implements to see whether any of this property was his. The 2 men also traded arguments and cited biblical passages about the nature of slavery and human brotherhood. Eventually, seeing that the elder Gorsuch had been abandoned by his followers, the black defenders began to advance from the house and the fields, and the armed Gorsuch continued to demand the surrender of the fugitive slaves. The resistors struck him down and killed him. Dickinson Gorsuch ran back to his father, pistol in hand. One resistor disarmed him and another severely wounded him with a blast of squirrel shot. Dickinson staggered away and the fight was over. Federal authorities were sufficiently armed to mobilize 45 Marines to Lancaster County. When they arrived on September 13th with a civil posse, there began a series of arrests that would place 27 black men and 4 white men behind bars. They were held for several months on charges of treason against the United States. 9 other black men were charged but not apprehended, and 1 white man was charged but not imprisoned. With 41 defendants, it was the largest mass charge of treason in U.S. history. Though Eliza Parker and her sister, Hannah Pickney, had been active resistors and may have delivered the fatal blows to Gorsuch, the women were never charged. The main resistors, however, had fled. William Parker ultimately reached Canada with the aid of Frederick Douglass, among others. Eliza made her way across the border separately and rejoined her husband in November of 1851. The Parkers ultimately settled on a farm in a community of escaped slaves near Windsor, Ontario. There, William and a group of associates penned an account of his life that was published in 1866 in the Atlantic Monthly under the title The Freedman's Story. The narrative was intended by its publishers to help demonstrate that the newly freed people of the South were worthy of full rights and citizenship. Federal authorities eventually tried Castor Hanaway on the charges of treason. Prosecutors justified the charge on the grounds that forcible resistance to federal law amounted to levying war against the United States. The essence of the prosecution's case was that African American resistors, presumably incapable of organizing on their own, had been goaded into violence by a white abolitionist. The case, however, fell apart as a key witness for the prosecution testified on the stand that he had been pressured into giving false testimony. When Hanaway was acquitted on December 11th, prosecutors dropped the charges against all the others. No one was ever convicted for the uprising or the death of Gorsuch. The white press immediately dubbed the incident the Christiana Riot, a term preserved by most white historians into the 20th century. Most Northern white commentators condemned the resistance, although some abolitionists praised the resistors' motives while disapproving of their methods. The Southern press was outraged, and some even called the incident a harbinger of secession and civil war. The Christiana Resistance, however, was no riot. It was not a case of spontaneous mob violence. Rather, it was a calculated act of resistance by an organized group of armed African Americans in response to what they saw as legalized kidnapping. The Northern black press recognized it as such, and Frederick Douglass praised the violent resistance as absolutely necessary to deter slave captures from operating in the North with impunity. The Christiana Resistance has received relatively little historical attention, despite its size and significance. With about 15 to 25 black participants, it was not much smaller than the Turner Revolt of 1831, and as an accomplished act with blood drawn, it stands ahead of the abortive conspiracies of Gabriel Prosser and Denmark Vesey. Unlike other acts of passive resistance to the Fugitive Slave Act, it was an armed action that was carried out exclusively by African Americans and cost the life of a slave catcher while preserving the freedom of at least 4 escapees. Notwithstanding that it occurred on free soil, it was a major act of resistance against slavery by people who had themselves been enslaved. All right. I felt that this story was important because there are many points that can be gleaned from this, and many things that we can think about, whether it's in our sobriety or just in life period as black people. Okay. One was the fact that if you notice, when the four escaped slaves that escaped from the South and came into Pennsylvania, they connected with William and Eliza Parker, who were previously enslaved Africans that had escaped, right? And because these 4 enslaved Africans connected with people who had escaped, had survived, right, had thrived, and started this community in Christiana of other escaped Africans. They were able to solidify their freedom. In the end, those four enslaved Africans actually escaped, along with the two that helped them, William and Eliza Parker, right? So even when we're talking about sobriety, right, connecting is important. Connecting with other survivors, connecting with others that are on that journey, right? You've got the four that connected with each other. These are people that were fighting and resisting slavery, working to escape. And then you have two that had actually escaped, that had succeeded. So from a sobriety standpoint, we can look at that as people who are in the midst of working on their sobriety, whether it's in an AA group, right? Fellow soldiers, as I talk about in my book, Sobriety in Black. And then you have elders, people who have had some time in sobriety, years, right? Maybe years or decades, that can glean knowledge onto younger folks that may be new in this, right? And one of the things I noticed, and something I thought about, was the fact that the four that escaped, right? Essentially, that escape is a form of passive resistance, where you resist without, quote unquote, harming others, right? And so you got four slaves, they're new to this, escape for freedom thing, and all they know is to run, right? It's just like when you're new to sobriety, you think all I need to do is run from alcohol and I'll be fine. I don't need to fix anything internally. I just need to stay out of the way of alcohol and I'll be fine. But anybody who's walked in sobriety knows that that is not the case, right? That is not the case. There is more that has to be done. You have to actively defend your sobriety. And once these four young slaves, right, enslaved Africans, right, met with some survivors of slavery that had been doing this for a minute, the one thing they learned from these two is you've got to be prepared to kill. You've got to be prepared to confront your fears. Armed resistance, right? Well, I've always talked about Black Wall Street and how the biggest mistake they made on Black Wall Street was they didn't put together an army. They didn't put together a form of active resistance. They were not, right, able. They might have been willing, but they definitely were not able to organize and to stop the threat. But with the help of William and Eliza Parker, right, who, one, connected and protected these four slaves that were on the run, and then created a community of armed escaped slaves, right, in order to protect themselves, they were able to do that. And without those guns, without the ability to unalive, because I know for YouTube, I guess we can't say kill and murder. I've been watching videos and everybody's saying unalive. So, I'll slowly start getting this right. But without the ability to knock some fools down, right, they very well all could have been taken back into slavery. Because one thing about the Fugitive Act that when I read it, the actual act itself, is all a white person had to do was say, oh yeah, that black guy across the street is an escaped slave from my plantation, and they could just go after any black people they wanted in the North, in the South. That's what the biggest problem was with the Fugitive Slave Act, aside from the fact that we even needed one, right? And so you want to think about that. You have to be able to not only fight for your sobriety, but you've got to defend it. As black people, we got to fight for our freedom, and we've got to be able to defend it. And if that means laying some people down, then so be it, right? Because remember, back then, slavery was legal, right? Didn't make it right. And William and Eliza Parker knew that and were willing to die, kill, murder, do what they had to do, just like the Honorable Nat Turner, in order to protect their freedom. And you have to protect your sobriety in the same way. So connection is important. Having the courage to do what you need to do, everything you need to do to protect your sobriety is important. And that's something that we can glean from this glorious resistance, the Christiana Resistance of 1851, which actually happened on September 11th in 1851. So we have a reason to at least celebrate September 11th as Black people. Also, the power of organization, right? These escaped slaves, thanks to William and Eliza, who neither one of them faced any charges, they escaped. They did what they had to do to lay down their enemies, and they were able to escape. And they were able to do that because they organized. I hear and I've read about, for the first time, I didn't know about this because I don't go to AA meetings, about 13th step, which is basically people who take advantage of others in recovery. It's basically a form of sexual assault where somebody who people go to AA meetings and find vulnerable individuals, right? And prey upon their vulnerability in order to get sex, in order, romantic relationships, right? And it is a colloquial term, which really I don't prefer to use, but those who know, those in the sobriety space know exactly what I'm talking about when we talk about the whole concept. I'll just say the concept of what has been labeled the 13th step, right? And I saw a post online where they were talking about, well, what do we do about this? Because I guess it's common. Like I said, I don't go because as a Black person, most of the AA meetings full of white folks, people try to say everybody's the same in sobriety. No, we're not. Racism still exists, and it exists in AA, and it exists in recovery as well. All right, which is why we have to, one of the reasons why I wrote my book, and one of the reasons why Black folks in sobriety have to organize to have our own spaces, which exclude everybody else so that we can talk about everything we want to talk about without anybody trying to guilt us out of discussing things that may make them feel uncomfortable, right? Which is, of course, something I ascribe to. But being able to organize, getting with other people, connecting with other people, and organizing with other people. Right. And in dealing with the whole act of people preying on vulnerable people in AA meetings and, in sobriety or recovery circles, it needs to be pointed out. It needs to be attacked without bringing it up, without recovering loudly. You're going to always continue to have that problem. So for those in the AA circles, you need to be bringing that up. If somebody is in the group and they are taking advantage of people, they need to be, however you want to consider attacked, they need to be attacked. They definitely need to be pointed out. And it should get to the point where people are willing to do what they need to do in order to protect their sobriety. I'll let you figure out what that, I'll let you figure out what that process entails, right? But these people were prepared for war. They fought, and the original people who came together all escaped because they were willing to do that. And when it comes to sobriety or anything that you're fighting for in life, any form of self-improvement, you've got to be fully committed to it in order for it to take place and in order for it to be long lasting. All right. So I would definitely suggest looking up and getting more information on the Christiana Resistance. Interestingly enough, when you Google Christiana Resistance, hey, these idiots, these racists, all right, these white supremacists still call it a riot. And before I go, we're going to explain, for those who love explanations, because you know me, I don't explain nothing. I'm going to do this to help y'all out. The difference between the difference between resistance and a riot. Firstly, a riot is defined, put this, as a violent disturbance of the peace by a crowd. Defending an attack upon your home, if everybody in your house decides to defend themselves against an attack, they are not committing a riot. They are resisting, okay? And resistance is defined as the refusal to accept or comply with something, the attempt to prevent something by action or argument. Resistance, riot are not the same. But the people who write the history know this. And they know if they throw the word riot on it, one, it takes away the intelligence that was involved in the organization. Just makes it sound like it was some spontaneous thing that happened, right? And it takes away the fact that there was one side that was wrong and there was one side that was absolutely right. And those who laid down them slaveholders, my people, were absolutely right. And, you know, for me, I wish they would have all gotten knocked down as far as I'm personally concerned. But now, every September 11th, I have a reason to smile. All right. So I'm going to leave you with that. Hope you guys have a great day. Hope you got something out of it. If not, guess what? I don't care. It's done. I laid it down. It's something you can go check out. You can learn more about. And for my people, it's something we should all be proud of. God bless you. And I'm out. Peace.